Welcome back, biologists. We're going to continue our lecture that we left off on last week, and that takes us all the way to slide number 57. We actually finished a few slides after this, but I thought that I would back all the way up to the start of mammals and remind you guys of a few things as we lead into the new information on placental mammals. But recall that there are two mammal subclasses. The first one there is Prototheria, and there's only one surviving group or one surviving lineage, and this led to three species that still remain on the planet today. We know them as monotremes, and they include the two species of spiny echidnas, the long spine and short spined echidna, and also the platypus. And these guys still retain the reptilian trait of laying a shelled egg, and that's pretty neat. The second group are the Theria, or the Eutheria. You might see it written that way in some other texts, meaning the true Theria. And this includes two surviving lineages, including the marsupials and the placental mammals. And these two groups give live birth. So these are truly viviparous. And so let's continue on. We'll briefly summarize the monotremes. Remember, the monotremes are actually the Prototheria, the remaining group of prototheriids. And monotremes all lay eggs. So again, they retain that reptilian trait. And another reptilian trait they retain is the possession of a cloaca. Remember, a cloaca is a single opening, just like reptiles, where waste products are passed out, urine is passed out, and also all reproduction takes place there. Another thing is that they lack protruding nipples, so they simply extrude milk out of milk glands. And remember that there are only three surviving species, including the duck-billed platypus and those two species of echidna. Then we moved on to the marsupials, and remember that the marsupials differ from the monotremes in that they have a far more elaborate embryonic development, where they actually do possess a very short-lived placenta when the fetus is still in utero, but that it is subsequently absorbed prior to this worm-like creature without any hind legs emerging from the vagina and eventually crawling back up out into the pouch. And this is kind of an interesting development that we see in all kinds of creatures all over Australia, including kangaroos, wombats, wallabies, koala bears, etc. So this is a marsupial trait. And remember that we only have one remaining marsupial in North America. That would be the Virginia possum. And it's a curious story how the Virginia possum got to be in North, Central, and South America. In fact, when marsupials were found all over the planet, it was the placental mammals, the next group of mammals, that eventually displaced them all. And the only place where they did not do a good job of displacing all marsupials was on the continent of Australia, which by that time had become separated from other continents, and the placental mammals had developed on other continents and so never arrived to Australia to wipe everybody out. Interestingly enough, the Virginia possum was the one marsupial species in the Americas that was never wiped out by the emergence of the placental mammals. Okay, then we saw that really cool video here of a kangaroo giving birth. Okay, so now we can move on to the placental mammals. These are true placental organisms where they retain a placenta throughout the entire duration of development of the fetus. And so recall that the placenta actually is an organ that forms from both the fetus and the maternal tissue, and it acts almost like a scrubber or a buffer between the two, kind of protecting either one from the immune system of the other. And in this case, the young undergo lots of development before giving birth. So in the case of humans, it's 9 months. But in all other placental mammals, it's quite a long period of time. Relatively speaking. So this includes the vast majority of existing mammals on the planet, and of course that includes us too. Now, this development, this internal development, was a huge break. You see, by developing a fetus in utero for a long period of time, you do a better job of guaranteeing its survival, or I should say a more of a guarantee that it will actually survive. So this strategy alone made it stand out over evolutionary time, and it really did a good job of usurping all other mammal species on the planet, including the monotremes and the marsupials, who only thrive on the one continent where placental mammals never got to until humans introduced them. So, speaking of humans, we're going to go ahead and move forward to the evolution of primates, and this portion of the lecture actually mirrors the Walking with Cavemen movie that we got to see in lab. So let's move on to primates. We are primates. That's pretty cool. So we're talking about us now. And there are really two novel features that we see emerging in the primates when they first evolved. And both of those features help them in living in an arboreal environment, particularly when you're nocturnal, which our ancestors most certainly were. Number one feature is grasping fingers and toes. If you're going to live in the trees, having grasping fingers and toes is great. And one thing that emerges when you have these grasping fingers and toes is an opposable thumb. And this is now present in us and lots of other primates, but keep in mind that while it may have evolved to help us deal with living in trees, once that step happens, that is, once we develop an opposable thumb, that opens up all kinds of possibilities for other developments, which we'll talk about later, like tool use, for example. The second novel feature here is binocular vision. In our case, since our earliest ancestors were probably nocturnal, they required this binocular vision to better judge distance. So in this case, the eyes are towards the front of the face. They're not oriented on the sides like you might see in a horse or other ungulate. And also, it really helps you judge distance when you're jumping from limb to limb, branch to branch, without killing yourself. Now, this whole system evolved probably about 40 million years ago. That's about when we find the earliest primates, and we can split these primates at 40 million years ago into two major groups. The first one are the prosimians, and these pictures here off to the right are of the three remaining prosimian lineages that we have today. They used to be a whole lot more numerous, but now we really only have these as our surviving prosimians. So the lemurs, the lorises, and the tarsiers are the three main groups. We're not going to go into much detail on these three groups other than to note that, see how they have that binocular vision with their eyes set right prominently in the front of their face, and all of these guys are predominantly nocturnal, very large eyes, thus increasing their visual acuity. The second group are the anthropoids, and that is the group that we belong to, along with all other apes and monkeys. So, prosimians, now we're on to the anthropoids. So the anthropoids, these are the monkeys, apes, and humans. Yes, that's us down there on the lower right. And pretty much we're all diurnal at this point. That is to say, our prosimian ancestors are all nocturnal, but that the vast majority of anthropoids are diurnal. And this is kind of interesting because by being diurnal, we are able to take advantage of the shades of light in the electromagnetic spectrum, so we can see colors. So this is about when we see the evolution of color vision in the anthropoids is right around that mark where anthropoids emerge from the prosimian lineage. Now, the other kind of key characteristic here is that we have an expanded brain. So brains are good because they allow you to problem solve, and it helps you in many other ways. Although, as we learned from the movie, having a big brain is also incredibly expensive. So if you're going to have an expensive piece of machinery like a brain, it better really increase your chances of survival. A couple of other things that develop in anthropoids include a complex social interaction. So that's very obvious in humans, but the same thing is also true in other primates. So we care for our young for very long periods of time, and we see that in our closest cousins, but you also see it in other New World monkeys, which we'll talk about in just a second. That's the lower left monkey that you see down there with the long tail. Those are the New World monkeys. So our brains take long periods of time to accumulate knowledge. And this is something that is kind of a hallmark of the anthropoid lineage. We see this in lots of other anthropoids, not just humans. So let's take a quick look now at all the various primates that we're talking about here. We can actually split this into three main groups. And up there at the top left, we have the New World monkeys. Where did they come from? We'll talk about that in a second. Our Old World monkeys, and then also our hominoids, which includes us. So this division here seems to have happened about 30 million years ago. So remember our prosimian lineage, they kind of emerged and become prominent 40 million years ago. So now we're talking 30 million years ago, so more recent. And somehow, and there's lots of speculation on how, but I'll just say that somehow monkeys managed to make it to South America from their original Africa. And they retained this arboreal characteristic that kind of all primates had initially, but with the difference that they had the very prominent development of a prehensile tail. That is a tail that they could actually use not just to balance with, but to grasp with. So it actually acts almost like a fifth hand. Now, while that was the lineage that the New World monkeys followed, New World meaning like South America and Central America, that's the path that they followed. Well, the Old World monkeys and the hominids kind of remained in Africa and did not develop a prehensile tail. So it's just a separate, different set of circumstances, and they did not develop in those groups. Okay, so now let's focus specifically on the hominoids. And the hominoids include the apes and the hominids, which mean the humans, the gorillas, and some of our closest ape ancestors. Okay, so let's talk about the apes first. You're probably familiar with some of these, including the orangutan, the gorilla, and the chimpanzee, but the gibbon is also in this group, and the gibbons appear to be the most basal in the hominoids lineage, and so larger brains, a lot larger brains than other monkeys, than other primates, and also lacking a tail. Now, I'm kind of grouping these guys here, the hominoids, but the reality is that they're probably somewhat paraphyletic, at least in the apes. A lot of this still needs to be worked out. But one thing's for sure, we are very, very closely related to chimpanzees. So let's focus now on the hominids, which includes us, the humans. And this is shortly after the divergence of gorillas from the hominid lineage. We see the emergence of the chimpanzee line and the human line. So chimpanzees and humans clearly shared a common ancestor, and we know that from many lines of evidence, but one particular line of evidence that you can kind of set into your brain, partly because it appears in one of the quizzes, is that the protein for our hemoglobin and for the hemoglobin in chimpanzees differs by only one molecule, just a single molecule. So there you go, we're very closely related. Okay, now let's focus on some differences between apes and the hominids. And in the apes and the hominids, so we did have a common ancestor that was living up in the trees. And so that's very clear. But once we came down out of the trees, once the great forests that existed about 8 million years ago started disappearing, well, we kind of traveled down different paths. In the case of the apes, they became knuckle walkers. And in our case, we developed a bipedal way of living, which allowed us to run and do all kinds of other things, which we'll talk about in just a second here. But